I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts about volunteering. And as the title says behind, I'm going to explore some of the dichotomies that exist in the space. In Year 12, I was writing my first application. It was for a university scholarship here at Western Sydney, and at the time, no one told me, and I didn't realise that it would be the first of many applications that I would have to write in what has felt like a career of writing applications. But I did come across for the first time this question about volunteering experience. And I had to pause and reflect. And I found myself not being able to come up with any answers to this question. I'd spent almost my entire schooling life being very involved in my school community, in my local community, in my Tamil community, and I had just spent several months as school captain setting up the laptop project. Like Holly said, a digital education initiative that collects used laptops, refurbishes them, and then sends them off to parts of the world where students don't have access to a digital education. And yet, I found myself in this weird position where I couldn't think of anything for this question. And it's at that point that I realised that I'd always thought about volunteering as this very rigid, structured, formalised way of engaging in the community. And I had always thought of community engagement as almost a natural extension of my ordinary life, of all the things that I always did and was really, really interested in. And so as the years have gone on and my involvement in the space and my understanding in the space has evolved, a question that kind of lingers and still remains in my mind is how effective is volunteer-centred activity, and how effective is it in delivering community solutions? Australia has one of the most strong and dynamic volunteering communities. 1 in 3 Australians volunteer their time free of charge for causes that they really, really passionately believe in. And I think when we do volunteering locally, we do it very effectively because we understand the context of the space that we are working in. But the rapidly growing arm of volunteering abroad raises some very interesting questions about the culture of volunteer-centred solutions. And today I want to unpack some of the shortcomings of this culture and also explore an alternative perspective on how else we could be engaging in our communities. I want to begin our journey in Tanzania. You're very welcome. 15 American high school students went to a Tanzanian village to build a library. One of the students wrote an article in the Huffington Post reflecting on her experience, and she said that they were so out of depth in their ability to do construction work that they would spend 6-7 hours in the sweltering sun in Tanzania laying this brickwork, only for then the men in the village to come after sunset and dismantle all their hard work and then start relaying them in the middle of the night so that the students wouldn't get disheartened about how bad their work was. Catriona, a British high school student, recounted a similar story of her experience building a well in Nepal. She said that nothing was more cringeworthy than looking at the villagers politely watch on as what seemed to be an all too familiar scenario of very unskilled foreign labour trying to navigate various contraptions and put together some semblance of a well in the short period that they had. These stories are not few and far in between. In fact, volunteer tourism is a growing multi-billion-dollar industry. Yet it is also the cause for some of, not the cause, but a contributor to some of the biggest challenges that we face in our world today. In the 2 decades that volunteer tourism has boomed, there has also been a dramatic increase in the number of orphanages that are present in our world. 80% of these orphanages in our world today are filled with children who are not orphans. At the heart of volunteer tourism is a narrative about the volunteer, you and I. And I think it's very important to highlight that point before we begin to explore the double-edged impact of volunteer-centred solutions. On one end, you have the impact to the host community. The consequences of volunteering to people and places are very well documented. Communities often end up with things that they certainly don't need, that they certainly didn't ask for, that they don't know how to use, and that don't stand the test of time. What is the point of building a cubicle, a toilet cubicle, in a place that has no form of sewerage? What is the point of plonking a dental practice in a place where there is a village of where even the 70-year-old women in a village have perfectly pearly white teeth and have never seen a dentist before in their entire life? What is the point of plonking a library in a place that has no books? Long-term change is only effective and only happens when we equip people with the tools that they need to shape their own communities and solve their own problems. So when transporting our reality of what we think a good life is to a place where that bears no meaning or relevance, we are doing considerable damage. But the consequences of this run even further than that. Something that I don't think that we don't consider enough is the impact of this culture on the volunteer themselves. Despite the initial post-experience high that most volunteers experience, the promise of a life-changing experience is often short-lived. Research shows and has shown us time and again that volunteering trips that are short-term often have very little or no impact on the way that a volunteer gives or volunteers back in their community after that experience. People who embark on these journeys seeking self-discovery and cultural immersion and personal development often end up being very much the same person that they were a few months ago, maybe only with a sunburn and maybe a few grand out of their pocket. Moreover, what makes things worse, especially for young people, is a culture that almost puts pressure on young people to accumulate a suite of volunteering experiences, almost like a tick box exercise, where volunteering for the sake of it momentarily provides some moral elevation, but where students are left thinking to themselves whether they actually understood the communities that they were part of and really served them and fulfilled their real needs. I am fairly certain that we have a better way of doing this. While I do believe that there are extremely positive impacts that are being made in how we volunteer locally, and while I think it's almost easy for us to do volunteering badly when we are overseas, I think there is a fundamental question about how we consider volunteering. By definition, volunteering is about the volunteer. It is not impact-focused. It is not about community responsibility. It is ultimately a narrative of individuals. In my language, in Tamil, there is a foundational literary text called the Tirukkural, 1,330 couplets that all consider the ethical and moral challenges of everyday life. One of those couplets reads, "Kaimaru venda kadaipadu mari mattu, ennattum kollo ulahu." And it means doing one's duty without expecting any favours in return is like what the rain gives the earth. It means that the rain sets an example for us all. The clouds open and the rain pours only with a sense of duty to provide the world with the water that it needs. It expects nothing in return. Likewise, if we all did our part, expecting nothing in return, our communities would sing and the world would tick along happily. When I think back to my childhood and think back to my experience growing up, my perception of myself and the contribution that I wanted to make in my community was always rooted back in my sense of community, and not in a morally elevating way or a social high ground kind of way. It always came back to the kind of duty that the rain plays in our world, of just wanting to be a really effective cog in the wheel. My personal and professional goals, whether it was to study law or now work in public policy. Whether it is my sense of identity, whether it is my understanding of the ancestral history and culture of my people, but also the ancestral history and culture of this land, everything was rooted in understanding where I fit in society and how society shapes me. And I think this perspective is one that is really interesting to try and understand. Everyone plays a distinct part. Everyone has certain skills and capabilities that they contribute, but everyone has an equal duty to do so. It is difficult to articulate what this outlook actually feels like and looks like, but the closest thing that I can think of is like when you're a part of a family. There are no titles, there are no jobs written down, there are no terms and conditions, but you're kind of hitched on for life. And because everyone chips in, the load is lighter for the individual. And just as you kind of can't claim vacuuming or washing the car on your CV, recognition is not individual, it goes collectively to how we achieve together as a community. Volunteering has been around for a very long time, and this call to shift our perspective does not seek to take away from all the fantastic things that have been done in the past and all the incredible contributions that continue to be made locally when we understand how our context functions. But as a global community, we face some incredible challenges. 70.8 million people are currently displaced, an unprecedented number of people. 13% of the world's population is undernourished, and currently our natural environments are being cut down and developed at a rate faster than ever before. And I think now is an opportune time for us to pause and reflect and consider shifting our perspective towards community-driven solutions, and also trying our very best to channel the inner rainmaker within all of us. Thank you.